All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to get started here today. I want to welcome you to a joint event that ITIF is honored to co-host with the Technology Policy Institute, TPI, and where my colleague Scott Walston is, but honored here, Scott. So we're pleased to co-host this on this event on what can we expect from a Trump administration with regard to tech and telecom policy. So we have a great lineup, I think, today. I'll open it with a few sort of framing remarks. I'll turn it over to Scott to do the same. We'll then go into a panel looking more at e-commerce, IT, internet policy, and then we'll close the morning by a panel that Scott will lead on telecom policy in the new administration. So we had over 400 or so RSVPs for this event, and you can ask the question, well, why is everybody so interested in this event and in reality interested in what this incoming administration is going to do in this space? And I think there's really four reasons. One is that compared to the last time we went through this process, which was 2008, the technology industry has become much more important to the U.S. economy. It's been transforming not just information industries, but really many, many industries, transportation, finance, higher ed, et cetera, et cetera. So just the issue itself is now more central to the policy space in Washington. Secondly, in 2008, what we thought would be the agenda of the Obama administration was I think, a little clearer. We wrote a report at the time looking at comparing Obama tech agenda to Senator McCain's tech agenda in the campaign, and it was pretty fleshed out. You could sort of predict what he wanted to do, and he did a lot of that. When we did our technology comparison from Clinton and Trump, it was actually a lot of uncertainty about what Mr. Trump was going to propose. So I think that's part of the issue here, is we don't know in many areas what President-elect Trump is going to do. A third area, I think, reason for interest is that he, at least during the campaign, Mr. Trump made several statements that were somewhat controversial with regard to the tech industry, related to, for example, encryption and trade, which again I think raises the stakes. What's really going to happen here? And lastly, it's a little unclear what the administration is going to look like, certainly in terms of personnel, but also in terms of sort of ideological flavor, if you will. There's certainly a trend of sort of just a conservative Republican administration, which is somewhat predictable. We know what that looks like somewhat. We have obviously now a Senate and a House controlled by Republicans. But then there's another sort of strain in Trumponomics that's not about sort of laissez-faire economics. It's about something else. Perhaps more interventionist, the kinds of economic policies that Steve Bannon has talked about, for example. So I think it all leaves this in kind of up in the air. We're not sure what's going to happen. Let me start with a few framing remarks then about that. I think for an administration that has a president-elect who has talked about a central theme of his campaign was about making America great again, it's really going to be hard to make America great again without technology, without innovation, without a strong U.S. technology industry. That's going to have to be a key component of that. We can't restore U.S. manufacturing without transforming into smart manufacturing. We can't really fix K-12 education without much more focus on technology and data. We can't make government work better without more effectively using technology. So I think at one level that means that the administration has got to embrace innovation and technology if it wants to accomplish its goals. And one place to start, if you think about this sort of as concentric circles, one place to start is within federal agencies. There's a report out there that we released a few weeks ago laying out what we thought a Trump agenda should be with regard to innovation and technology. And one place to start is with federal agencies. We've advocated that that the president appoint a chief innovation officer for every federal agency. Every agency has the ability to be engaged in innovation, both internally and externally. Very few of them think about that in a formal way. We've also proposed that when he puts in place someone who heads up OMB, that one of the key tasks there is to create an office within OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within OIRA, that looks at how regulations affect innovation. Right now, OIRA only looks at regulations from a cost-benefit perspective, very sort of narrow, static effect. Doesn't really look at the longer-term dynamic effects of how regulation can harm or help innovation. They really need to do that. And lastly, the federal government, as we've seen over the last few years with sort of, major systemic failures like the OPM hack, really needs a sort of soup to nuts, top to bottom reform of IT. And part of that is to just update and modernize antiquated systems that the private sector would never ever use now, and yet they're still in the federal government. So that's along the lines of creating a dedicated capital fund, similar to what the Move It bill, which didn't pass, I don't believe this session, but was in Congress, to give agencies more ability to invest in things, in IT modernization. The second part, if you're sort of coming out from the concentric circle, would be to do a better job of interacting with the other parts of the economy. For example, one of, I think, the signature initiatives of President Obama was to open up data. He really made that a top priority, and by doing that enabled a lot of private sector innovation around open data. That's not enacted in law. This new president could go forward, could go backward. We would encourage him to go forward, and also support the Senate and House bill that we've been working with on the Open Government Data Act, which passed the Senate in this session but didn't pass the House. Another area that we talked about was challenge the federal government to develop 100 APIs, application protocols interfaces, in 100 days. APIs are this ability for the private sector and other organizations to interact with, in a machine-readable way, with federal systems, and really would open up an enormous amount of innovation. Whether that's in the U.S. Patent Office or the park system, it's really, I think, kind of the next level of e-government. A third area would be for these agencies to really think about their mission as not just about internally, but how they can help transform other agencies. We're beginning to see that with things like what the Department of Transportation is doing with smart cities and smart transportation. But we could see that really across the board. Department of Interior embracing an Internet of Things strategy for how they manage federal lands. The Department of Education launching a challenge grant program to really have data-driven innovation in one or more districts around the country. The administration should think about a digital infrastructure council. If we're going to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure, which we need to do, that needs to be 21st century infrastructure, not 20th century, and that means enabling and embedding digital technologies in that. And lastly, more spectrum. This is a real opportunity. Spectrum is one of those inexhaustible needs we appear to have, and we get more and then we need more. And there's a real opportunity for freeing up more spectrum, particularly with regard to the federal government.